The first ever visual effect can be seen in a film called The Execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. Produced in 1895 by Thomas Edison's lab for displaying Edison's kinetoscope device, this 18-second film shows the titular character being beheaded, using a now standard trick employed by any 9-year-old with a camera. When the axe is raised, the camera cuts and Mary is replaced with a mannequin, which is then decapitated once the camera is rolling again. It's a bit of an obvious gimmick now, but back then, imagine walking up and being like, oh, now to see what's in the old kinetoscope. Dear God! What's also interesting about this film is that up to this point, it had mostly been real-life events and lab technicians sneezing that made up the content of Edison's films. But for the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, they went out and employed professional actors, put them in costume, and had them stand there and watch a beheading. This wasn't just the first use of visual effects, it was also the first use of actors, of having people step in front of the camera and pretend to be someone they weren't. Something pretty fundamental to the art of telling stories on film, right? We could complain all we want about visual effects destroying movies, but if we did that, we would be idiots. Because it turns out, visual effects are as fundamental to cinema as actors. So accept it. This is part of your craft. You don't have to learn how to do VFX, but you do at least have to learn how to appreciate them and how to employ them. Start looking at visual effects as a two-sided coin. On one side, they're solutions to problems. Sometimes the problems are big, like we want to make a movie about dinosaurs, but turns out dinosaurs are super extinct. Or we want to make a movie about an astronaut struggling to survive in the vacuum of space. But going to space is super expensive, and also it doesn't have any oxygen. More commonly, though, the problems are small, like we ran behind schedule and had to shoot at magic hour, even though the scene called for a blue sky. Or there's a visible plane in our medieval war epic. Or there's a scene in Real Gone where the main character, who has been desperately trying to kill himself but to no success, wakes up in a hospital room and once again, and much to his chagrin, is told that he's going to live. Hearing this, he promptly stands up, walks to the window, and jumps out. After a few seconds, we cut to him right back in his bed again, now with a leg cast, as the doctor informs him that he broke his leg, but he's going to live. I was convinced the funniest version of this joke would play out in one static shot. This meant we needed to find a location that looked like a hospital room without us having to do very much set deck, had a window and was on a ground floor so Darren could jump out of said window without dying. That's a lot of variables, and as you can expect, we had a lot of trouble finding anything that met all three criteria. This is the location we were able to get. It was actually a storage closet in a walk-in clinic, so even though we knew the joke worked best when it played out in one shot, we realized we were going to have to shoot his jumping out the window as a cutaway. Okay, compromise. That's filmmaking. That's when we discovered that finding a window that opened big enough to fit a grown man, located on the first floor of a building so we could jump out, was nearly impossible. I even sent out the super shady tweet asking if anyone knew of a window on a ground level floor that opens enough for a person to fit through. Pretty robbery in hindsight. We weren't able to find anything in time for our shoot, so we decided we'd just film Darren get out of bed, leave frame, then cut to a shot we would get later on of Darren or a double jumping out of a window. Then something interesting happened on the day. We were lighting for the scene and my DP, Chris Adams, had rigged up a light pointed at the wall through some razor cut slats and foam board to imitate sunlight coming from an off-screen window, to help tie the shot with whatever cutaway we'd get later of Darren jumping. But when I saw Darren run the scene, I saw an opportunity to get that single shot gag I originally wanted, but modified. We got a take of Darren getting out of the bed and walking out of frame. Then we flew the foam board out and got a take of Darren's shadow on the wall appearing to jump out the window, which was really just Darren jumping off of an apple box just off frame. Then in post, I stitched these shots together, masking out the blinds on the wall and animating them to compress and rise like blinds getting pulled up. Here's the final result.
Well, you've got some scrapes and bruises, but you're gonna live. Well, you broke your leg, but you're gonna live.
On the other side of the coin, VFX can be a major source of inspiration. I learned After Effects watching Andrew Kramer's tutorials on videocopilot.net. What usually happened was I would get halfway through a tutorial, I'd see him use some filter or feature in After Effects that I didn't know existed or didn't even know was possible until that moment, and suddenly I'd be overcome with 1,000 possible applications of said effect. And out of that would come ideas for action scenes or visual gags or even entire short films. Few things are more inspiring than being shown what's possible. And when you realize what's possible, you immediately acquire a world of resources you didn't previously know you had. Resources you can lean into and build entire stories from. Okay, so here are a few of the core principles I believe will help set you up for success when you set out to direct a high concept visual effects shot. 1, commit to it. A lot of high concept visual effects shots require you to pretend something is there that isn't there yet, or to climb on the back of a big guy in a mocap suit, or to fire a gun that isn't actually firing anything. Do everything you can to get you and your cast and crew present for it. Whatever it takes. Make sound effects, have movie score playing loudly on set, set the tone for everyone so they know that this is a place to play and pretend without judgment or ridicule. It seems intangible, but 100% of it will show up in the final product. The next principle is to move. Intelligence and intelligent people will tell you to lock the camera down and add camera moves in post to get the assets as clean and pure as you can so you have maximum control in post. Ignore these people. Shoot your VFX plates as close as you can get to the same energy and motion and style of every other shot in your movie. Otherwise, it will stand out like a sore thumb as something synthetic and weird. After Effects has built-in motion tracking and 3D camera tracking, as well as masking and rotor brush tools. So you have the tools to match move and composite elements into your moving shots. And there are often benefits to having the plate be on the dirty side. Motion blur hides a lot of sins, as does depth of field, and even the occasional lens flare. Shoot your VFX plates like you would shoot your movie. Treat the camera as character. Gareth Edwards had a rule on his 2015 reboot of Godzilla. He said the cameraman couldn't be suicidal, so for any shot we got, the cameraman had to survive the shot, and the camera couldn't do things that real cameras can't do. You need to always be thinking about how your camera operator, whether it's you or someone else, would naturally behave if whatever VFX thing you're going to add to this shot were to actually happen there on set. Is it a giant explosion? Where would the cameraman be safe from that explosion if you really did it on set? If you're doing a shot of someone hanging off the side of a building, figure out what angles a camera could realistically capture this action from. Don't hover out in midair. If you're going to create an imaginary world, you need to create imaginary rules. Then try to mix methods. Don't just assume a 3D object needs to be a 3D model. For this shot in a Red Giant Film Team experiment I did a few years ago, I created the flying dart asset by filming a real Nerf dart on the end of a drill bit against a blue screen. For this dinosaur shot in another film team experiment, instead of hunting down a 3D model of a pteranodon, I just animated a picture of a pteranodon toy that was sitting on my shelf. It doesn't always have to be complicated, and mixing practical elements with digital elements is often the key to great VFX shots. People paint the two as opposing sides of some industry war, but they actually get along quite nicely and do their best work together.